Okay, so we're good to go. All righty. So my name is Nick Brait, and I'm one of the elders here. And I started this tactics journey a month ago. And so this is the continuing saga. And so for those of you who weren't here, and for those of you who were here, but like me, have trouble remembering what I had for dinner yesterday, we're going to do a quick review. And before we do that, let me just say a quick prayer for us all. Father God, you are so good to us. We thank you for this glorious day. And Father, we just ask that you would get me out of the way. Let your words, let your wisdom flow through to the people who hear this, and that they would just be motivated to engage in spiritual conversations as they go throughout their days. We praise you and thank you in the powerful and precious name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus. Amen. So what we learned a month ago in sessions 1 and 2 was we discovered that there is a missing piece when it comes to spiritual conversations, and that missing piece makes it a little bit difficult. That missing piece is actually a bridge from the content, which is what we have in our heads, what we know, to the conversation itself. We also learned that there is a tactical approach that we can use to help manage the conversation and to keep us in control of that conversation, to be in the driver's seat, so to speak. We also learned that tactics help us maneuver in the face of opposition, as well as accusations that the other person might have. Tactics also make conversation seem more like diplomacy as opposed to D-Day. And I'm sure all of us who have engaged in spiritual conversations have realized that sometimes it feels more like D-Day. We learned that there's a distinction between tactics and strategy. Strategy is the big picture, it's the overall view, whereas tactics help us involve ourselves in the details of the engagement and actually maneuver within the conversation. We came to the realization that tactics are very powerful and that there's a dark side to them. They should never be used to belittle or humiliate the other person. Tactics are merely clever ways to keep us in control of the conversation and to use the other person's errant thinking to help turn them to the truth. We also talked about modifying your goal in spiritual conversations, changing that from the mindset of being a harvester to being a gardener. And the goal of the conversation doesn't need to be conversion. We're there to prepare the soil, plant some seeds, to water and nurture, and do some weeding. And that's what we're there for. We want to be gardeners. We want to put a pebble in the other person's shoes to annoy them, but annoy them in a good way, so that every time they take a step, they're thinking about the good news of Jesus Christ. We also introduced the first Columbo tactic, which takes us puts us on the initiative, but in a disarming way. And we do that through using calibrated questions to advance that conversation. Questions are a great way to open up discussion. They're interactive, they get the other person thinking, and they allow us to make headway without actually preaching to another person. That first step in the Columbo game plan was to gather information, and we do that by asking the simple question, what do you mean by that? It's actually capturing a word or a phrase or a concept that that other person is using, and then simply asking, what do you mean by that? The attempt there is to get clarification, to understand more clearly what the other person is really talking about. And it also provides us with important information about their views and beliefs as well. We also talked about learning to be an asker as opposed to a teller. It's just a natural tendency that we all want to put our 2 cents in. Sometimes it's $1.20 that we want to put in, and we can hijack conversations. So rather than making statements initially, what we want to do is become an asker and just really find out more about where that person is coming from. In order to do that, I suggested bringing T to every conversation. T is the acrostic. T is the tame your teller. So again, don't be the person who's making those statements. E is engage your asker. Be the inquisitive one. Show your genuine curiosity. And then A is become an active listener so that you can really understand what that person is thinking, what they're believing at the time. We examined the second Columbo tactic, which is reversing the burden of proof. And we talked about the cardinal rule of reversing the proof. And who remembers what that is? Who can read the screen? Whoever makes the claim, there's the burden of proof. Okay. Pretty simple there. Okay. The key Columbo question number 2 is, how did you come to that conclusion? So with the first question, we wanted to figure out what the person was thinking. With the second question, we want to understand why they think that. What's the basis for that? So asking that second Columbo question, how did you come to that conclusion, is important. We also learned how to avoid what we call the professor's ploy, and that's the common move that people use to shift the burden of proof back to us, okay? But if they've made the claim, they bear the burden of proof, okay? So don't let them do that. We also talked about not needing to force a conversation to a conversion. We can just let it die its natural death. You know, if it gets so far and it goes no further, we don't have to push it to the point where the person is dropping on their knees, praising the Lord, praying the sinner's prayer. That doesn't have to happen. We're gardeners. That's what we're here for, to just help people understand that. And those first 2 Columbo questions, that's what they're there for, to help us be good gardeners. Then we also talked about how the Columbo tactic can help us stay out of the hot seat. And we do this by switching to the inquiring mode, and we slow down the conversation. We ask clarifying questions, and then we use those magic 5 words. Let me think about it. And then we can do that on our own, and when it's appropriate, and then get back to them if we want to get back to them at all. So now we're moving into Columbo number 3. And the first 2 steps of the Columbo tactic are there, like I said, just to gather information. The third use of Columbo is more proactive, and it really helps us use the information that we gathered in steps 1 and 2 to either make a point or to advance our own point of view. The second tactic is also used to exploit a weakness or a flaw in the other person's point of view. So when we think about it, those first 2 questions, how much knowledge does it take on our part to really use those 2 questions? What do you think about that? How did you come to those conclusions? Doesn't take anything. Okay, so those are very, very easy. However, when we use the third step, we need to know something specific. And what we need to know is where we want to take that person. Again, this is us proactively now taking the person to a place that we want them to be. And so the important thing with tactic number 3 is we need to know where we're going. And maybe that's best done with an example. So let me use the one that I think makes a lot of sense here, is Jesus is the only way to salvation. So let's say that's the point that we want to make with the person in this conversation. So in order to use Columbo tactic number 3, we need to know ourselves, that yes, Jesus is the only way, but we also need to know why he's the way as well. And so one of the things about this is that we all have this knowledge. But if somebody, puts us in that situation and we just lay those pieces of the puzzle out on the table through a series of statements, well, the other person can simply say, well, okay, that's all well and good, but that's your opinion. And where do we go with that? Nowhere, pretty much. Okay. So what we do in with Columbo number 3 is we use a little different tact here. So let's say we change that to a question, and you're in a conversation, and the person says, "So, why do I need Jesus? Okay, I believe in God. Why do I need Jesus?" One of the better ways to do this would be to let the other person put those pieces of the puzzle on the table for us. And once they do that, it's a lot harder for them to back down because they've given us that information already. And so let's say that we're in this conversation and the person says, "Why do I need Jesus?" Okay. Well, a common response that we might have is that, well, God created us to be in a relationship, and then we disobeyed, we did some bad things, we sinned, and there are consequences to the sin, and in this case, the consequences is death, and that's, Romans 6:23, and there's nothing we can do to get out of it, and so that's where Jesus comes in, and well, you guys know the rest of the story, right? Okay. The Columbo approach is slightly different. And with using Columbo 3 as the example here, it might sound something like this. And you first want to begin by acknowledging the question and then asking permission to actually ask a couple of other questions. And it might sound something like this. And should they say, "Why do I need Jesus?" And you could come back and say, "Well, that is a very, very important question. Before I answer that, can I ask you a couple of questions?" Now, they're typically going to say yes. And when they do, this is your first question. And you simply ask, "Do you believe that people who do bad things should be punished?" And of course, they're probably going to say yes, and you can agree with them. Okay. The second question is a little bit more personal. And you would ask then, "Have you ever done any bad things?" Okay. And if they say no, just ask to talk to their spouse. And that'll clear that up real quick. Trust me. Okay. And so inevitably, they're gonna say that, "Yeah, I have done some bad things." And you can agree with them as well, because you know that you're as guilty as them. So snuggle up right next to them and say, "I have too. So I'm just like you." Okay. So at this point, it might be a good idea to just review where you've gotten to. You've gotten to the point where people who do bad things should be punished, and that person, as well as you, have done bad things. So think about it. That person has voluntarily put those pieces on the table for you. And so at that point in time, you might simply say something like, "Do you know what I call that? I call that bad news." Okay. Because yes, people who do bad things deserve to be punished. And yes, I've done bad things and you've done bad things. So now imagine yourself in court and you're standing there before the judge. And in this case, the judge is God. And he's ready to hand down the sentence. And of course, you're as guilty as you can be. The other person is as guilty as they can be. And just before God hands down the sentence, he pauses and looks at you and says, would you be interested in a pardon or clemency?" And of course, what's your answer going to be? "Oh, yeah." Okay. So let's just push the pause button on this imaginary conversation here for a moment and talk a little bit about where we're at. It is very easy for the other person to agree that people who do bad things should be punished, as well as that they've done bad things, because we are hardwired with the sense of justice and guilt. So we know that, yeah, I should be punished, and yes, I deserve it, okay? And through this questioning, what we're doing is we're helping them understand the force of the problem so that they can understand the force of the solution, because we're both in big trouble. So going back to the conversation, you might say something like, God is now, God is offering us this way out. 2,000 years ago, he came to earth, lived a life that we should be living, and took on all of our guilt and shame and suffered, and he took that punishment so that we wouldn't have to. So now we have two choices. We can either trust in Jesus and not have to suffer the punishment, or we can do it on our own and we can suffer the punishment ourselves. Okay, so which one do you want to choose? Okay. A little bit, okay. So does that make sense? Okay. So far, so good. Excellent, excellent. So again, what we try, yes.
I just can't help saying this. I've been in that situation, and one of the things that has really worked is to ask, do you have kids? Did you ever have to teach your kid to smack the other one if they didn't wanted a toy that the other kid had? Did you have to teach them to be naughty? And so that gets them into that whole other situation where it's universal and it's, oh, a baby can't have sin or a child can't have sin. Oh, okay. And so that's been just powerful.
Yes.
Yeah, I just couldn't that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Excuse me, could you summarize the comment for the video? Because
I'm sorry. Yeah, so Barb was just saying that she has used the question, do you have children? And using that as a way to show that you don't have to teach a child how to basically be bad. Okay, because again, they are, we tend to hit our brothers and sisters and or take the toys, that type of thing. And again, she was pointing out that gives us a sense of how, I'll use the word depraved, that we really are. And so that's just a natural tendency that we have.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. So again, hopefully you'll see that we try to keep that very simple, very understandable for that other person. We didn't get into the Bible. We didn't get into any deep theology. We essentially let the other person put the pieces of the puzzle on the table for us. And it still took us to that conclusion that, yeah, we're in trouble and we do need help. Okay. Another example here might be the one where somebody says to you, well, prove to me that God exists. Well, that's a pretty tall order when you think about it. And of course, in this case, that first Columbo question might be very handy here. Well, what do you mean by prove? Because if somebody says that to me, I really have no clue what they would accept as evidence. I would have no clue as to how much evidence that they would need for this proof of God. So I think in a situation like this, you could, go back, ask that question, what do you mean by prove, and get some clarifications there. The other thing would be that you can negotiate for something a little bit more reasonable, simply by saying, that's a pretty tall order to prove that God exists, because I don't know what your benchmarks are. I don't know what it would take to really convince you. Can you maybe rephrase that? That would give me a little better chance of being able to answer that question. And so maybe they come back with, okay, well, I don't want proof, but how about, well, give me some good reasons why God exists. Okay.
Nick?
Yes.
Another possible question there would be, what makes you think he doesn't?
Okay.
And then we find out why they're leaning towards atheism.
Yeah. Yeah, so Marty just added that a good question there might be to them, why do you think that he doesn't exist? So again, putting the burden of proof on them, all right? So that's good, you've learned something, I'm glad. Yeah. So again, you want to acknowledge their question, and then again, ask for permission to ask a couple more questions. So it might sound something like this, well, that is a good question, and I'm glad you've rephrased it, so I have a better chance of answering that for you. Can I ask you a couple of questions? And in this case here, what you may do is ask a simple question like, so do things exist? Okay, so you might be thinking, as my kids so often said to me, like, duh, of course things exist. Look around, right? Yes, they do exist. And of course you can agree to that. There's no doubt about that, all right? The second question takes you a little bit deeper there, and you ask, have they always existed, or did they come into existence at some point in time? And again, you'll get some response from them. The vast majority of people and scientists all agree that the universe is not eternal. In other words, it has not always existed, which leads us to the point where there was a start in time. A lot of people call that the Big Bang. As Frank Turek likes to say, I can agree wholeheartedly with the Big Bang because I know who the Big Banger was, okay? And so if that's the case, and we do have a point in time where things started, then we've got this problem here of, okay, then what caused these things to come into existence? And that's your third question. What was the cause for these things to come into existence? And they may come back with a myriad of different explanations. However, there are only two. One is that either something caused everything to come into existence, or no thing caused everything to come into existence. Okay. So if we lean first towards that something caused everything to come into existence, then what we need to understand is that that something had to exist outside of the universe and the space-time continuum, okay? Because you can't be part of that and create yourself, okay? So that something had to create that. And that something had to be either supranatural or supernatural in order to give us this incredibly complex universe that we live in, okay? So that something had to be powerful. You just look at the vastness of the universe, the majesty of the mountains, all of that type of stuff. It had to be intelligent when you think about the incredible complexity of the universe, not only on the grand scale, but down to the molecular level. It takes design, and it had to be personal. And so as you think about that, powerful and intelligent and personal, we're getting pretty close to the G word here, okay? And so if God didn't cause the universe to exist, what's your other alternative? No thing or nothing caused the universe to exist. And I don't know about you, I just don't have enough faith to believe that nothing caused everything into existence, okay? So that's just way too far-fetched for me. Any thoughts, questions? Is that understandable? Pretty easy? And again, we didn't get into deep theology. We didn't get into the Bible. And again, a lot of the people that you may talk to, they don't want to talk about the Bible. They don't really want to talk about theology. This is kind of common sense that we're working with here. Okay. The other thing that we can do with Columbo tactic number 3 is to exploit the flaws or weaknesses in somebody else's way of thinking. And the key here is that you do need to know the truth in order to identify the flaw that somebody else is thinking. In other words, they say this, and then you have to ask yourself, well, does that really mesh with the truth that I know? And if it doesn't, then we can maybe help exploit that. So the first one that we want to look at is the question of intolerance. Okay. And so let's say we're having a conversation with a person and they get frustrated at your position. I don't know why they would do that. And they sit there and they just accuse you of being intolerant. Okay, I mean, that's their prerogative. But your response might be that Columbo 1 question, what am I saying that makes you think that? That's the classic, what do you mean by that question, okay? And they say, well, you think you're right. Well, yeah, of course I think I'm right, otherwise I wouldn't have said it, okay? So you can agree with that. But then you may just turn that around and ask them, well, do you think you're right? And of course, they're pretty much going to have to say yes at that point in time because they've already told you that you're wrong. And so at that point, this is where you want to put on your faded trench coat and whip out that stub of a cigar in your mouth and just look at them and put on that Columbo curiosity and just simply say something like, yeah, I need some help here. You look like a pretty intelligent person. Perhaps you can help me. How is it that when I think I'm right, I'm intolerant? However, when you think you're right, well, you're right. What am I missing here? Okay. Well, you're not missing anything. Okay. They're just, at that point in time, they just reverted to name calling. Okay, and that's not right. That's a flaw, and that needs to be uncovered. And that happens when the person shifts the conversation to attacking you as opposed to attacking the point that you're trying to make. And so again, that's a flaw that just needs to be laid out there. Another example would be abortion. Okay, and this again, you have an interchange with a Christian man who says that he personally believes that abortion is wrong. However, he doesn't see himself forcing his view on other people. So again, using the Columbo curiosity, asking that first question, what makes abortion wrong for you? And he can come back and clarify his viewpoints at that. And let's say he comes back and he says, well, because it takes the life of an innocent human being. Well, now that's good for us because now we understand that's his point of view. Essentially, what he's saying is that abortion is killing. All right. So he's laid his cards out on the table, and all we have to do is summarize what we're seeing. And so we might just come back to him and say, well, let me just give back to you what I've heard here. And you say that abortion is killing an innocent human child and that you would never do that. However, you think that women should be allowed to do that to their child. Is that correct? Okay. You're not accusing, you're not judging them. You're just giving back to them what they have given to you. And that's the flaw in their argument. Okay, you see that as killing, but it's okay for other people to do it as long as you don't do it. There's something wrong with that. Okay. So any questions on that, the intolerance or the abortion or those types of things? Again, it just takes an intent listening so that you don't let anything just kind of fly by you. Because as you have these conversations with people, there's a lot that they just let fly by and nobody ever catches them on it. And this is where, as you catch those things and you just start to ask questions about it, all of a sudden the wheels start to fall off the bus as they go along there. Yes.
You might have covered this when I wasn't here, but what would you say to the person who says, oh, that's your truth? And this is my truth.
Well, again, that's a great question, Barb. And
Repeat it for them.
oh, I'm sorry. So Barb said that what if you come to that person who says, well, that's your truth and this is my truth. Okay. And again, one of the things that that you want to do is you want them to put those cards on the table for you. Okay. And so, for instance, with the abortion one, they've already said, well, this is killing an innocent human being. All right. And all you're pointing out is that, okay, so this is killing a human being, killing an innocent human being. And it's okay for other people to do that as long as you don't do that. Okay. You're at that point in time, you're just laying that out there and you don't have to go any further with that.
What would you say to someone who said, why should we be concerned about that aborted fetus? It will be in heaven.
Why should we care? So the question was, why should we care about that aborted fetus? Because it will be in heaven.
I should have said, why should you care about the fetus, but the act of doing it? Why should somebody feel guilty over having their fetus aborted when that aborted fetus will be in heaven?
Why should a person feel guilty about their aborted fetus when they know the fetus will be in heaven? Okay. Interesting question. Yeah.
Isn't killing still killing, regardless of the disposition of the soul?
Right.
We have isn't killing still killing regarding regardless of the disposition of the soul.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm trying to think of what question comes to mind at that point in time. Marty, you got any great wisdom there?
I mean, that question in response to that statement is a good question because it forces again back to the person who's made the statement about the baby going to heaven. Doesn't mean that it's right, and so we have to ask the question, well, don't you believe that killing is wrong? And most people will say yes, they believe killing is wrong,
right,
regardless of the outcome. I mean, okay, I have to confess, I'm making a confession here. I've been watching all the old episodes of Perry Mason on MeTV lately, and it's amazing how when the person at the end of the episode finally breaks down and says, "I did it," half the time they'll say, "And I'm glad I did because he deserved to die." It doesn't matter if they deserved to die or not; it's still wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as to Lori's point, so say you have a person who is on life support, okay, and a family member is just like, oh, this person is really, I've got to let them go, and you pull the plug, okay, it's killing, but you could say, okay, but they're gonna go. So whether it's a fetus or it's a person, an aged person who's, what's the difference?
I don't think those are the same.
It's still killing though.
Somebody on life support is being maintained.
Well, let's say they're not on life support. Let's say they've got cancer and they're not going to, they're not going to live.
So now you're talking euthanasia?
Whatever, it's still killing, right?
So,
Euthanasia
Whether
is,
you're
yes.
killing a fetus or you're killing a person who is sick. You know,
Those
it's
are the
still
same.
killing.
Yes,
You've
those
still
would
got-
be, those
you've
would be the
still got a
same.
killer and you've got the victim and they're both going to heaven.
You're playing God.
Yes.
Somebody on life support is being
Well,
maintained by.
that wasn't a good example. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
That was not a good example.
I mean, it's man that's keeping a person alive on life support. not-
Yeah.
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 And I'm sorry if you can't, if you didn't hear all that, it's too much to recap. Show up, be here live, okay? Boy. So the last idea that we want to look at are what we call suicide statements. And these we're identifying statements that basically kill themselves, all right? And this tactic takes advantage of the tendency that so many erroneous points of view have to self-destruct. And these self-destructive views are commonly known as self-refuting statements. So they basically defeat themselves, and it makes our job easy because all we have to do is kind of point out how they do that. A good example of this is an old Peanuts cartoon that I remember, where Sally is there and she says, "No, that's my new philosophy. I don't care what anyone says. The answer is no." And of course, Charlie Brown simply says, "That's your new philosophy, huh?" Yes. I mean, no. Then after a slight pause, "You've ruined my new philosophy." Okay. So statements that commit suicide just have within themselves the ability to self-destruct. And so a couple of them that you would look at, and "I can't speak a word of English." Well, if the person says that in English, that's self-refuting, okay, right then and there. There are no sentences more than five words in length. Well, okay, but that sentence is already more than 5 words in length, so it's self-refuting, You can't know anything for sure. And the skeptic is going to say that with absolute surety when they do that, okay? So when a statement fails to satisfy its own criteria, it's going to be self-refuting. And therefore, if it's self-refuting, it can't be true. And here's why the suicide tactic works. It basically trades on the fundamental rule of logic called the law of non-contradiction. And that law simply states that two contradictory statements cannot be true at the same time. In other words, A cannot be non-A in the same time and in the same way. So it's pretty simple. What we find is that all suicidal statements kind of express or entail contradictions. So there's always contradictions there. They make two claims that are at odds with each other. So here's an example. I never repeat a word, never. Do you see the contradiction there?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So I don't repeat words, yet I've just repeated never, a couple of times. Okay. There are no absolutes. What would be the contradiction there? But yeah, that's an absolute statement saying that there are no absolutes. Yeah. I've always loved this one. This page intentionally left blank. Okay. It's another one of those, duh, Okay. Or how about this one? I'll give you 3 good reasons why you can't use logic to find truth. Do you see? Yeah. So yeah, it's a little bit more difficult to see, but that person is using logic, of course, to disprove the use of logic. So yeah. Sometimes these contradictory statements, these suicide statements, are a little bit more subtle. Greg Kukl, who is the author of the book Tactics, has a syndicated radio show, and on one of his shows, he was correcting another Christian radio broadcaster who had said something, and Greg didn't agree with him and kind of, put that out there on the air. Well, shortly after that, he got a caller, and the caller started criticizing Greg for basically correcting the other Christian radio host on the air. Okay. Do you see the contradiction there? Okay. He's doing the same thing that Greg just did and saying that, Greg, you can't do that, Or how about this one here? The statement, you shouldn't force your morality on me. Yeah, so as that one just starts to sink in there, you might say, well, why not? Are you telling me that it's wrong to say that other people are wrong? Well, isn't that what you just did to me when you said I shouldn't force my morality on you? So again, often people are going to make statements that are self-refuting, and you just need to be kind of keyed in, listening very intently to recognize those statements. And one of the ways to do that would be to first identify the basic premise or the belief or conviction or claim that's being made. All right, and remember that sometimes it's not that obvious. And then you have to ask yourself if the claim undermines itself. In other words, does it satisfy its own requirements or not? All right. Can the idea be stated in the form of X is the case and X is not the case at the same time? And if so, there's a contradiction and the statement commits suicide. So now that you're all well versed in this, here's one a little bit of challenge for you. Okay, so see if you can identify the contradiction here. All religions are equally true and valid. So what's the suicide that's taking place right before our eyes?
Trying to establish an absolute across the religions that in and of themselves contradict each other.
Right. So essentially what that statement does is it sets a standard that can't possibly be true across all religions. For instance, Christianity is a religion. So according to the statement, Christianity is true and valid. However, one of the primary premises of Christianity is that all other religions are false. Okay. And so you've got a little bit of a problem here. Either Christianity is true and all the other religions are false, or all the other religions are true and Christianity is false. So again, we've just witnessed a suicide happening right before our very eyes. So I wanted to suggest some exercise here to improve your Columbo skills. And let me just start out by saying that using the Columbo tactics, as we've talked about, it doesn't come naturally, and it takes practice, okay? And so part of that is doing what I call the ARC exercises, and that's not for people who are just over 50, okay? The A is for anticipate. So as you're going into a conversation with somebody, it's always good to anticipate what sort of conversation that might be, and what questions, what points of issues, contentions, whatever it is might be, and kind of prepare for that. I know that as I interact with my friend Brian, the Jehovah's Witness, I'm always trying to think through what he might be saying to me, so that I can come up with some questions to answer that. So that's anticipate. The other is reflect. And you're going to find that some of the best learning that you'll come up with is going to happen after the fact, after you've actually been in a conversation and you've had the opportunity to engage somebody. After that happens, immediately, for me, it has to be immediate, is I need to do a self-assessment. I need to do kind of a debrief and ask myself, what could I have done to make that conversation go better? What questions could I have used as opposed to statements that I made? So it's just going through and reflecting. And the P is for practice. And like I said, this doesn't come natural to, as far as I know, anybody. So it needs to be practiced. But the more that you practice it, the better and easier it becomes. And I would suggest that you kind of do that in front of a mirror to begin with, and actually kind of put yourself in that practical situation, because you're going to feel a little bit better about that. And then engage in some role play. Get a good friend, your spouse, whoever it might be, and actually engage in a role play to kind of just go back and forth to see what that looks like. And then I challenge you to stray out of your comfort zone and actually engage in a conversation with another person. Again, as you do, the more you do that, the easier it becomes. You know, think about when you first got behind the wheel of a car. There was a lot of trepidation, at least for me there was, because it was like, wow, this is cool, but this is scary at the same time. Okay. Now I don't even think when I get behind the wheel of a car, and I guess that could be just as dangerous, right? So one of the other things that I do want to just talk about here is defending against Columbo, because you may be in a conversation and the other person may actually be using Columbo tactics against you. They have no clue that they're called Columbo tactics or anything like that. However, they are there, and you shouldn't feel bad or worried about Columbo question 1, what do you mean by that? Or, you know, how did you come to that conclusion? Because you've got the knowledge, you know that. It's where the person is actually using that Columbo 3 tactic on you, and he's, or he or she is kind of trying to lead you someplace through questioning. And the recommendation I would have here is that you first want to just stop the advance by not letting your friend set you up with questions. Maybe saying something like, you know, I'd really not rather answer questions right now. I would really like to know what you think, okay? And then kind of getting back and gaining control of the conversation again, and you know, say something like, you know, it sounds like you're trying to take me someplace through your questions to make a point. You know, it would be really more helpful for me if what you do is just, you know, simply state your point here so that I can understand it. And then you can use those 5 magic words, you know, let me think about it. Okay. So again, it's kind of regaining that control of that conversation. All right. So here we are, the summary. So again, I apologize for having tried to condense two sessions into one here, but since we're doing the congregational meeting next week, I had to kind of do that. So I realize that I've been letting you drink from a fire hose here, but here's what we did today. So we looked at the third use of the Columbo tactic, which is using questions to make a point, and that's advancing our own point of view by getting the other person to put the pieces on the table for us. The other thing that we do with Columbo 3 is expose the flaws and weaknesses by, again, carefully listening to what they've given us in response to questions 1 and 2, and then moving from there, kind of going forward. We also talked about the suicide tactic and how certain statements are self-refuting and in essence kill themselves. So all we have to do is recognize those and kind of point those out. We learned about 3 ways to practice the Columbo method: anticipate, reflect, and practice. And finally, we talked about how to defend yourself when someone uses Columbo 3 against you. And that's first by stopping the advance and then regaining control of the conversation. Questions, thoughts, comments? All right. I've obviously just overwhelmed you.
You don't have that all printed up, but.
No, but it's in the book, so all you have to do is buy the book, Tactics, and
Oh,
it's
I'm sorry.
it's all there.
Crap, it's way back at the beginning.
I understand, yeah. Yeah, so all of this information is in Greg's book, and I'm just trying to condense it for you to make it a little bit easier. Yeah.
Wow, Nick, thanks so much for this incredible packed summary. I will try to condense all your points into an email, but it will be difficult this time. So I just want to remind everyone that, as Nick said, there is no journey next week because of the congregational meeting. So thank you so much, Nick.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.